Something is wrong with the recording. You don't hear it at first, not unless you know what to listen for. But once you do, once someone points to that thin sliver of sound hiding in the static, you can't unhear it. And when you understand where that sound came from an object that isn't supposed to transmit anything, the ground beneath your life shifts in a way you don't expect. This is the moment everything starts to break open. The file leaked at 2:17 a.m. A short audio clip, 37 seconds long, posted anonymously on a private Slack channel for graduate astronomy students at the University of Montana. The message said only, "Tell me if you hear it. Don't forward." Within an hour, it was on 3 Discord servers, 2 private Telegram groups, and an inbox to a man who would immediately understand the implications, Dr. Noah Mercer, astrophysicist at the University of Colorado Boulder, known among colleagues for 2 things: his brutal honesty and his unhealthy obsession with interstellar objects. When the clip reached him, he was awake, sitting on his porch in Boulder with a mug of coffee he didn't need, staring at a sky washed pale by city light. He opened the file expecting nothing. He had no idea that by the end of the night he would be driving north through the dark with the windows down, trying to steady his breathing. But let's not run ahead. Let's start with the first 37 seconds. The leak came from a small observatory in the mountains of western Montana, the Stillwater Ridge Radio Array. A modest, underfunded installation operated mostly by volunteers and graduate students who finished their homework early. On most nights, the array stared at the sun's radio afterglow or tracked meteor trails for research programs that barely paid the electricity bill. But that night, at 11:42 p.m., one of the receivers turned itself toward a very specific patch of sky, not by accident, not because of a glitch, but because one of the students, bored and half frozen, had decided to see if the interstellar rock is doing anything interesting. The interstellar rock, of course, was 3I-ATLS, the third known object to enter our solar system from deep space. Strange trajectory, bizarre geometry, a shadow inside its coma that shouldn't exist, a cosmic trespasser. The student wasn't expecting anything. Nobody was. And yet, 3 seconds into the clip, there's a pulse. A thin, crisp, impossible pulse, like a whisper from an empty room. It doesn't sound like much, just a short, rising note buried in static. But imagine for a moment that you know the sky. Imagine you've spent years listening to radio noise from Jupiter, solar windstorms, Earth's own electromagnetic hum. Imagine you know the difference between chaos and intention. That pulse isn't chaos. It's too clean, too precise, too crafted. Most people ignored it. A glitch, a compression error, maybe even a prank. But Noah Mercer didn't ignore it. He played the file again, and again, and again until the neighbor's porch light flickered on. By the 10th replay, he wasn't thinking about sleep anymore. He transferred the clip to his workstation, dropped it into a spectrogram, and froze. There it was, a structure, a shape, a frequency comb sharp enough to shave with. Natural signals don't do that. Even pulsars, perfect in their timing, carry the fingerprints of physics: turbulence, scattering, dispersion. This didn't. He leaned closer to the monitor, elbows on the desk, heartbeat pressing against his ribs. He zoomed in. The comb pattern was repeating every 0.21 seconds with the precision of a machine. And the signal was coming from the coordinates of 3I-ATLS. His first thought wasn't wonder. It wasn't excitement. It was fear. Cold, rational fear. Because if this was real, then everything humanity believed about the silence of the universe had just cracked. And if it wasn't real, someone had just pulled the most sophisticated hoax Noah had ever seen. He needed confirmation. So he called someone he trusted, Dr. Lina Torres, radio astronomer at Caltech, 2 time zones west. It was barely midnight in Pasadena. She answered on the second ring. "Noah, why the hell are you awake?" "Listen, I need you to open the file I'm sending, right now. Don't ask questions." "You sound like you found a tumor on your telescope." "Just open it." He sent it. There was a long minute of silence. Then, "No way." "Do you hear it?" "Noah, where did you get this?" "Montana. Stillwater Ridge Array. It leaked." "And you think this came from—" "I'm not thinking anything yet." Another silence. Then Lena's voice dropped. "Send me the coordinates they were pointed at." He did. She swore under her breath, "That's—" "I know. That's the exact position of 3I-ATLS. He closed his eyes, exhaling sharply. There it was, the thing he didn't want confirmed. "Noah, do you realize what this means?" "I do, and I really don't want to. Because even if the signal wasn't artificial, even if it was just some bizarre plasma effect, which he doubted, the public discovery of any structured emission from an interstellar object would ignite the scientific world like gasoline. The internet would riot. Governments would seize equipment. Funding agencies would crawl out of the woodwork. Careers would rise and fall overnight. And above all that, hovering like an unspoken threat, if this thing was sending a signal, who was listening? And what were they expecting in return? Lena cleared her throat. "I'm going to run this through our archive data sets. If another observatory caught the same pulse, we'll know in minutes. Call me the second you find anything. You're not going to sleep." "No." She hung up. Noah pressed his palms against his eyes. His mind was racing. He needed air. He grabbed his keys, stepped outside, and let the cold bite at him. The sky above was milked out by city glare, but he looked up anyway, instinctively, as if the object itself might be staring back. He didn't know then that within the next hour, 2 more observatories would detect the same pulse. He didn't know that the data would match down to the microsecond. He didn't know that before sunrise, 3 different agencies, NASA, NOAA, and a Pentagon division he didn't even know existed, would contact every observatory in the western United States asking for raw logs. He just knew the world was about to change, and he didn't know if he wanted to be part of that change. The second message arrived at 3:04 a.m., a text from Lena. "Check your email. Now." He ran inside, opened the file she sent. It was an audio clip. Short. Compressed. He hit play. At first, just static. Then, a rising chirp. Sharp. Metallic. Not random. Then 20 seconds later, another chirp, slightly lower in pitch. The pattern was identical to the Montana signal. But this one came from Pasadena. A completely different instrument, a completely different region of the sky, yet the same pulse. He opened the spectrogram. Same comb structure, same spacing, same impossible precision. He felt a weight settle on his chest. One anomaly is noise. 2 is coincidence. 3 is a pattern. And in science, patterns are dangerous. The third message came at 3:18 a.m., this time from a number he didn't recognize, a small regional observatory in Arizona. The subject line read, "We think we got it too. Please call." He didn't call. He downloaded the file. He listened. The Arizona clip was the cleanest of all. The array had unusually low interference that night. The pulse came through like a blade, thin, metallic, rising in pitch like something stretching awake. The comb structure was even sharper. He stared at the monitor, breath shallow. His throat felt tight. His hands were trembling. 3 separate observatories, 3 identical signals, all pointed at the same object. He wasn't ready for what that implied. He whispered to the empty room, "Please be natural, please be natural." But even as he said it, he knew. Natural signals don't coordinate themselves across multiple facilities. Natural signals don't arrive with this kind of engineered clarity. Natural signals don't behave like intentions. A knock at the door made him jump. It was his neighbor, the guy from next door who always woke at 4 to go jogging. "You okay, man?" he asked. "Your light's been on all night." Noah forced a smile. "Yeah, just working." "You looked like you saw a ghost." Noah almost laughed. A ghost would have been easier. When the neighbor left, Noah sat back at the desk. The sun wasn't up yet, but the horizon was softening, that gray-blue moment right before the day intrudes. He felt hollowed out, as if his body was moving on autopilot while his mind wrestled with something too large to fit inside a human skull. His inbox pinged again. A message from Lena. "There's more. Call me, now." He called. She answered immediately. "Noah, I checked the timestamps. All 3 signals arrived within a 1-second window." "That's impossible." "I know. That's why I'm calling." "That would mean that the source was directional. It swept past all 3 observatories almost simultaneously. That only happens if the transmitter is small and very, very close." Neither of them spoke. 3I-ATLS was close, astronomically speaking. Close enough that a directional emission could sweep Earth like a flashlight beam. "Noah," Lena said quietly, "why would an interstellar object emit a focused radio pulse?" He didn't answer, because the honest answer was too absurd, too dangerous, too obvious. Instead, he said, "We need verification from outside the U.S. If someone in Europe or Asia caught the same pulse, they didn't." "How do you know?" "Because I checked their logs, and because the pulse didn't hit them." "Meaning?" "The signal didn't sweep across Earth at random. It swept across one part of Earth, a specific slice of longitude, as if targeted." Noah rubbed his face. He felt nauseous. "Maybe it's a natural beamed emission," he said weakly. "No natural mechanism emits with that kind of spectral discipline." He knew she was right. He just didn't want her to be. "Noah," Lena's voice softened, "what do you think this is?" He swallowed. His throat hurt. He didn't want to say it out loud. Saying it meant owning it, claiming it, becoming responsible for it. "I think," he said slowly, "that 3I-ATLS might not be a passive object." Lena exhaled sharply. "Jesus." "Or," he added quickly, "something behind it, or something using it, or—" "You're babbling. I know. Noah, this thing isn't just reflecting radiation. It's transmitting. It's choosing direction. That's impossible." "Unless it's not a comet." Silence. Long, heavy silence.
Then Lena whispered the thing they were both thinking. What if this wasn't meant for us? Noah closed his eyes. The question sat in the air like smoke. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because the truth was already there, crouched in the corner of his mind. Humans were not the intended audience. We were the eavesdroppers. Noah, Lena said, voice trembling slightly, you need to come to Pasadena. We need to analyze this together. No, he said. I'm going to Montana. Montana? Why? Because the first signal came from there. And if there's something wrong with that equipment, we need to rule it out. And if there's nothing wrong, then we're already too late. He hung up. By 4:01 a.m., he was in his car. By 4:05, he was on the highway heading north, dawn rising behind him like a warning. He drove with the windows cracked open, cold air streaming in, trying to stay grounded, trying to think rationally. But every few miles, he'd see something. A radio tower blinking in the dark, a plane leaving a faint trail of light, and he'd feel a jolt of fear. Because now he understood something he hadn't processed yet. If 3I ATLS was transmitting, then someone, somewhere might be waiting for the answer. He tightened his grip on the wheel. No one on Earth had prepared for that possibility. No one knew what replying would mean. No one knew what staying silent might cost. Somewhere above him, invisible in the morning light, the interstellar object drifted through its cold trajectory, silent to the eye, silent to the mind, except for that single rising chirp embedded in the static of a Montana night. He replayed it in his head, that thin metallic whisper. He didn't want to admit it, not even to himself. But the longer he listened, the more undeniable it felt. It didn't sound like noise, or distortion, or physics. It sounded like a beginning. He pressed harder on the gas. Montana was still 10 hours away, and the universe had just spoken. You don't forget a sound like that, not when it comes from a place that shouldn't be making any sound at all. After the first burst, the world split into two groups. Those who convinced themselves it was just noise, and those who couldn't sleep because they knew deep in the spinal cord that something out there had spoken, or tried to. The second signal arrived 3 nights later, just after 2:18 Eastern, when most of the United States slept and the West Coast was draped in fog. I was awake, of course. Ever since the first transmission, sleep felt like a luxury for another life. My body was moving, caffeine and adrenaline doing a half-hearted duet, but my mind was locked on one point in space, 3I ATLS, the interstellar wanderer with a shadow that shouldn't exist. I was sitting alone in the lab at MIT Haystack, screens glowing like small moons, when my phone vibrated. A single text from Austin Rourke, a radio engineer at Caltech who hadn't messaged me in months. Incoming. Lock on. No punctuation, just the words. And then the building's internal alert chimed, a soft, hollow tone that meant no good. At first I thought it was a glitch. Then the waterfall display on the main screen convulsed. A bright, unnatural streak cut diagonally across the spectrogram like someone slashed it with a razor. Jesus, I whispered. I pulled off my headphones because instinct told me no human ear was supposed to hear what was coming next. But instinct wasn't stronger than curiosity, and a second later, the headphones were back on my head. The signal hit, a hollow, pulsed rhythm, a beat. Slower than before, more deliberate, as if the first transmission had been a clearing of the throat, and this was the first syllable. Around me, equipment hummed and clicked as automated systems tried to interpret the data. Filters applied themselves, models spun, algorithms choked. The waveform refused to behave like anything the systems had been built for. It wasn't random, it wasn't natural, it wasn't accidental. It was patterned. Then for a moment so brief I wasn't sure it happened, the pattern stabilized into something close to a harmonic series. Not musical, exactly. More like two metallic plates vibrating at slightly different frequencies. A beating, a wobbling, a tension. And beneath it, a faint secondary tone flickering like a trapped insect. My chest tightened. This wasn't noise. This wasn't a glitch. This was intention. And that's the moment the second twist landed, the one that changed the tone of the room, the night, and honestly the entire investigation. The signal had Doppler shifted. Slightly, barely, but unmistakably. I stared at the screen, mouth suddenly dry. The source was moving. No, correcting. This wasn't just a fixed periodic emission repeating while the object traveled. The frequency shift meant the transmitter, or whatever was generating the pulses, had changed velocity relative to Earth during the signal. Not drifting, adjusting. "Are you maneuvering?" I said out loud, before the thought fully formed. The room didn't care. The signal kept coming. Slower now, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Each pulse separated by 3.8 seconds, almost unwavering, almost intentional. And then the sudden break, a snap, a gap, a silence so abrupt it felt like someone had slammed a door on the universe. The spectrogram froze. Then came a final burst, shorter than the others but sharper, narrower, almost surgical in its structure. A signature, a marker, no, damn it, don't think that word. A ping, and then nothing. I sat there in the dark, the hum of climate control suddenly too loud, the weight of that silence pressing into my ribs. The second signal had ended. The building felt colder. I finally exhaled, my breath shaky.
I didn't know yet what frightened me more, the fact that it transmitted again, or the fact that it changed its speed in the middle of transmitting. You don't get Doppler-consistent adjustments from rocks, or ice, or jets of sublimating material. You get that from engines. By the time the sun rose, the scientific world was eating itself alive. Data sets spreading across Slack channels and encrypted drives. Astronomers screaming at one another in group threads. Theories mutating hourly. You could feel the panic seeping into the professional politeness like dye and water. I walked into the main office around 9. People were already gathered around the central console like mourners around a coffin. Dr. Evelyn Shaw, gravitational dynamaticist, notorious skeptic, proudly allergic to anything sensational, paced in front of the screens with a knot between her eyebrows deep enough to store pens in. She saw me and didn't waste time. "This wasn't outgassing," she said. I blinked. "You're sure?" "Outgassing doesn't give you a 3-pulse acceleration in the opposite direction of the solar vector." She stabbed a finger at the screen where the Doppler profile hovered like a threat. "Nor does it give you a secondary frequency modulation that stays phase-locked during a shift." "So you're saying—" "I'm saying I don't know what I'm saying," she snapped. A few heads turned. Evelyn never snapped. She took a breath, steadied her tone. But this wasn't noise, and it wasn't natural. Someone in the back muttered, "Oh my God." She ignored it. "We matched timestamps with other observatories. Green Bank, Owens Valley, Arecibo's ghost facility in Puerto Rico, even Parkes in Australia caught the tail end. Every single detection shows a position shift toward Earth during the last milliseconds." The room fell quiet. Toward Earth. Not random. Not neutral. Directed. My stomach rolled. It wasn't fear. It was something colder than fear. The sense that a stranger had knocked on your door in the middle of the night and then pressed their ear against it to listen. Someone asked, barely above a whisper, "Has NASA commented yet?" A bitter laugh rippled through the room. No, NASA hadn't commented. NASA had gone silent, which, in my experience, was the same as a comment. I sat down at a workstation and pulled up my own capture of the waveform. As I isolated the final burst, something caught my eye, an anomaly too faint to see without aggressive filtering. I applied a high-pass filter, then a notch filter, and amplified the result 30-fold. There it was, a tiny tremor embedded inside the burst, A micropulse only a few milliseconds wide, positioned exactly 0.07 seconds from the end. I zoomed further. The tremor wasn't random. It had a repeating ratio. A cluster of 3, followed by a cluster of 5, followed by a cluster of 3 again. I felt the hair rise on my arms. Not random. Not artifact. Structured. "Evelyn," I called quietly. "Come look." She moved behind me, leaning close, her breath warm on my shoulder as she studied the waveform. Her eyes narrowed. "Repeat that." I did. Again. I did it again. She didn't move, didn't blink. Then she whispered, "That's a prime sequence." I swallowed. It might be. Or it could be. "No," she said, "don't hedge this. You know exactly what this looks like. Prime sequences don't happen in nature by accident, not in radio emissions, not embedded inside a pulse that already defied every known mechanism." Someone behind us said, Is that a message?" "No," Evelyn snapped without looking up. Then softer, "It's not a message, but it might be an identifier." "An identifier for what?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed to the Doppler shift again. "The bigger issue is this. The object adjusted toward our line of sight while transmitting. That's either a stunning coincidence or it's tracking us." None of us breathed. A young postdoc named Lane finally said what everyone else wouldn't. "If it's tracking us, does that mean it knows we're detecting it?" Silence fell like a dropped curtain. I felt a tightness in my throat. I didn't want to think about that possibility. Didn't want to picture an object in interstellar space listening for our receivers listening for it. A recursion of awareness that made the room feel suddenly too small. But before panic could fully root itself, Evelyn stepped back and forced her voice into a more practical register. "Let's not jump to conclusions," she said. "This could still be a non-biological instrument, an automated system, a probe, something that doesn't care who detects it." "What kind of probe?" someone asked. She hesitated. "Possibly a navigation beacon, or a course correction system, or even an automated emergency transmitter." The room exhaled, not quite relieved, but grateful for any alternative to the idea of something out there listening back. Still, no one said what we were all thinking. Why would an automated system maneuver during transmission unless the maneuver was part of the transmission? I stepped away from the console and rubbed my face. My head felt heavy. Maybe it was the sleepless nights, or maybe it was the gravitational pull of a truth I wasn't ready to face. That's when the monitors flickered again. All of them. The entire lab went silent as another burst appeared. Not a new signal. A replay. A sync from Green Bank Observatory. They had processed their version faster and pushed it to us in near real time. And their version had something we didn't. Better resolution, better clarity, and a detail that made my blood run cold. Inside the final burst, the same one with the prime number tremor, there was another structure, a faint one, a tiny modulation only visible with Green Bank's absurd sensitivity. A harmonic ladder. 3 rungs, each rung exactly 1420 megahertz apart. 1420 megahertz? The hydrogen line, the universal SETI calling card. Hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe. The frequency countless SETI teams used for decades because it was the closest thing to a cosmic signpost. Someone in the room cursed under their breath. Lane whispered, "No way. No way this is an accident." Evelyn didn't speak. She just sank into a chair like her legs had forgotten what to do. Me, I stared at that harmonic ladder and felt something inside me give. Not break. Shift. Like a truth settling into place. Unwelcome but inevitable. The object wasn't just maneuvering. It wasn't just transmitting. It was transmitting on the one frequency every listening civilization would know to check. I leaned forward, elbows on knees, heart pounding. "This isn't an SOS," I said slowly. "It's not a technical signal, not a beacon." My voice felt distant, like someone else was speaking through me. "This is a handshake." Heads turned. "No," Evelyn said, but it was weak. Less a statement than fear wearing the mask of logic. "It can't be." But the more I stared, the clearer it became. A prime number sequence, a Doppler correction toward Earth, a final burst containing the hydrogen line harmonics. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't nature. This was design. That realization should have filled me with awe, the kind we imagine humanity will feel when the universe finally answers back. Instead, I felt watched, observed, maybe even anticipated. I looked up at the screen tracking 3I ATLS's trajectory. The object was still on course toward Jupiter, slipping through the inner solar system like a knife through silk. I thought about that shadow inside the coma, the shape that held despite turbulence, the thing that looked like structure wrapped in ice, the impossible geometry, the statistical impossibility of its orbit. And now a signal timed perfectly, aimed perfectly, encoded perfectly. No, not a message. A test. A probe tapping the glass to see who taps back. Behind me, the team was murmuring. Fear, excitement, confusion. The air buzzed with a current that didn't belong to the room. I checked the Doppler logs again. The moment the transmission ended, the object's speed stabilized. No more corrections, no more shifts. It had changed velocity only during the broadcast. "Why stop maneuvering after transmitting?" Lane asked. I didn't want to say it. I really didn't. "Because," I whispered, "it got what it needed." Evelyn looked sharply. "Meaning what?" I forced myself to meet her eyes. "It means the transmission wasn't aimed at us. It was aimed past us." The room froze. "You're suggesting," Evelyn began. "I'm suggesting," I said, "that something else might have been the intended recipient, and we were just in the way." A coldness rippled down my spine. We weren't being talked to. We were being talked through. And whatever was listening on the far end, we had no idea if it was listening back. The building suddenly felt too small, too fragile, too human. Before anyone could respond, the terminal chimed. A data update from JPL. A fresh orbital refinement. A new anomaly flag. I clicked it open. My breath caught. During the final milliseconds of the signal, the object's trajectory shifted by a fraction of a degree. Tiny. Invisible to the naked eye. Meaningless to casual observers. But the shift wasn't toward Earth. It was away from Earth. Not evasive, not accidental, calculated. A correction, a course alignment. To what? I ran the numbers. The new trajectory line appeared on screen, a thin arc bending elegantly toward Jupiter's shadow, toward the one place in the solar system where no ground-based telescope could track it with clarity. My mouth went dry. "It's hiding," I whispered. The room stared at the screen as if expecting it to answer. Before anyone could speak, the lights flickered. A brief surge. The servers hiccuped. Then a new alert appeared, a time-stamped cluster from an Alaskan VLF station. A third signal, shorter, fainter, but unmistakably from 3II Atlas. Only this time, something was different. The signal wasn't pulsed, it was continuous, a monotone carrier wave, a dead, featureless hum, like an open channel waiting for someone to speak. And that's when the real terror hit me. Because if the channel was open, it meant two things. The transmitter was ready, and something else, something far away, now had the chance to answer. The room's hum faded. My heartbeat filled my ears. Somewhere in the back, Lane whispered the question that wrapped itself around the world like a tightening rope. What if we weren't the first to hear them? I didn't answer, because deep down I already knew
The signal wasn't the beginning, it was the middle, and whatever was coming next, we weren't ready for it. You can convince yourself that the universe is quiet, that silence is the default, and anything loud enough to reach us across light years must be rare, accidental, a freak event. But once you hear a second signal, then a third, once you hear something behave like intention, you stop believing in silence. And when you realize the signal isn't from the object, but through it, the silence around you becomes suffocating. The open carrier wave hadn't stopped for 11 hours, a flat line of energy sitting in a narrow band above the hydrogen line, as steady as a surgeon's hand. No pulses, no modulations, no patterns, just waiting. By mid-morning, the lab smelled like burnt coffee and restless fear. Nobody had gone home. Nobody had even changed clothes. The carrier wave pinned us in place like we were insects beneath a magnifying glass. I was slumped in front of my console, head pounding from the fluorescent lights, when the chief systems engineer, Mason Quinn, placed a fresh printout on the table. The thermal paper crackled. "You're going to want to see this," he said. I rubbed my eyes and forced myself upright. The printout showed the live Doppler shift analysis, the object's radial velocity relative to Earth. But something was off. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Look at the last 4 hours." I zoomed in. The Doppler hadn't changed at all, which made no sense. A natural object, even a drifting, unpredictable one like 3II Atlas, should show tiny fluctuations from solar wind, dust hits, sublimation jets, microtorques, anything. But the line was dead straight. Too perfect. For 4 hours, Mason said, the object held a constant velocity vector with 0 deviation. That's impossible. Exactly. Unless, I said slowly, unless the transmitter requires stability. Mason didn't blink. Unless something locked it in place. A shiver ran across my spine. Objects don't lock themselves in space without thrust, and the Doppler curve was too clean to be passive. "What's the energy estimate for the adjustment?" I asked quietly. He slid another sheet toward me. The numbers weren't huge by industrial standards, but for an icy interstellar comet? Outrageous. "Well," Mason said, "either it's using propulsion, or the universe has decided to break its own physics for dramatic effect." Before I could answer, the door opened and Evelyn Shaw walked in. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week, which, considering the last few days, wasn't an exaggeration. "Everyone in the main conference room," she said. "Now." We followed her out of the lab like reluctant soldiers marching toward bad news. The room was dim, projection screens already lit. Evelyn stood at the front, hands on the table, jaw tight. "We ran a cross-correlation on all 3 signals," she began. "Montana, Pasadena, Greenbank. Plus the Alaskan carrier wave. Something wasn't lining up." She clicked a remote. 4 waveforms appeared on the screen. "Not lining up how?" I asked. She zoomed in. The waveforms, identical in structure, were offset. Not random, not messy, precisely offset. Each observatory received the signal at a slightly different angle, she said. Meaning the transmitter wasn't pointing at Earth. We were off-axis. "Off-axis by how much?" Mason asked. "Too much for the signal to be intended for us." The words hit like a hammer. I leaned forward. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying the beam wasn't aimed at Earth. It was sweeping through us, not to us." A ripple of unease spread through the room. "But then why the Doppler correction toward us?" a postdoc asked. Evelyn turned to me. "Noah, tell them." I knew what she wanted me to say. The idea I'd been trying to bury since last night. The Doppler correction wasn't toward us, I said. It only looked that way from our reference frame. Explain, someone urged. I swallowed. What if the object wasn't adjusting to face Earth, I said. What if it was adjusting to maintain alignment with something else? Confusion, murmurs.
I continued. Something far beyond our line of sight. Something that needed a precise relay path. A cold hush fell over the room. A relay path. Not a broadcast, not a message. A relay. Evelyn clicked again. A starfield map appeared, threaded with two faint lines. One showing 3I Atlas's actual direction during the signal, the other showing the projection of that direction past Earth. They intersected far, far beyond the solar system, at a point with no star, no nebula, no object in any catalog. A blank patch of sky. A direction with meaning only to whatever sent the original signal. I stared at the point. My pulse crawled. "Hold on," Mason said suddenly. "You're saying the signal didn't originate from 3I at all?" Evelyn nodded. "It didn't," she said. "It was an echo." The room inhaled collectively. An echo. A reflection. A bounce. My stomach dropped. "Wait," Lane said from the back. "If this is an echo, that means 3I is acting like some kind of mirror?" "Not a mirror," Evelyn said. "More like a transponder, a device that receives, amplifies, and retransmits." A few people sat down abruptly. One person cursed. Evelyn clicked again. A new graph appeared. Power profiles. "This is what convinced me," she said. "These aren't emission signatures. They're reflection signatures." I stared. She was right. 3I wasn't generating the waveform, it was shaping it, amplifying it, forwarding it, like a router. But a router for what? And who had sent the original packet? I realized I was gripping the edge of the table hard enough to whiten my knuckles. "Okay," I said slowly. "If the signal got to 3I, where did it come from?" Evelyn exhaled. Her eyes flickered toward the star map. "We don't know. Not yet. But based on the decay structure, it originated hundreds, maybe thousands of light years away." Silence. Lane whispered, "Thousands." "Which means," Evelyn said, "the sender is long gone. Or the signal has been bouncing for centuries, maybe millennia." I felt a hollow ache in my chest. For a moment, everyone in the room looked small, insignificant, like kids who found a message in a bottle written before their entire species existed. "But why would it reflect here?" Mason asked. "Why this object? Why now?" Evelyn didn't answer. Because there wasn't an answer. Not yet. I looked at the trajectory map again. The object drifting toward Jupiter's shadow, toward a place where telescopes couldn't track it, a hiding place, a docking place, a rendezvous point. My mind kept circling the same impossibility. What if 3I wasn't just reflecting? What if it was waiting to receive something? Before anyone could speak again, the building's internal alert chimed, sharp, urgent. A red indicator flashed above the projection screen. Another signal. Not a pulse, not a burst, something new. We scrambled back into the lab like a single panicked organism. Screens were lighting up. Terminals chimed in discordant chorus. The spectrogram waterfall was erupting. "Where's it coming from?" I shouted. "Same direction," Mason said. "But—" He zoomed in. The waveform was different, chaotic, smeared, weak. "Is it another echo?" Lane asked. "No, this is distorted, scattered, like it bounced off something else before hitting 3I. "But it's in the same band," Mason said, "above the hydrogen line." I leaned over his shoulder. "It's not the same frequency," I said. "It's shifted." "Shifted how?" Evelyn asked. "Shifted
forward. A tiny gasp rippled behind me. Forward meant approaching. Approaching fast. "What's the Doppler vector?" I asked. Mason's fingers flew across the keys. Then he froze. Noah? Just say it." "The carrier isn't stable because the source is accelerating." My pulse stuttered. Accelerating toward what? He didn't need to answer. The Doppler curve climbed, then curved, then aligned. The source wasn't accelerating toward Earth at all. It was accelerating toward 3i and Atlas. A chill spread through the room like invisible ice. "Oh God," Lane whispered. "Is something following it?" I didn't want to consider it, but the data didn't care what I wanted. The source of the new signal was closing the gap between itself and 3i at a speed no natural object should have. No comet, no asteroid, no interstellar debris. This wasn't random. This was pursuit, or rendezvous. Evelyn steadied herself on a console. "How fast is the approach?" "Fast. Like hours, not days." The back of my neck tingled. This wasn't a chase. This wasn't debris. This wasn't some natural piece of rock. This was rendezvous behavior. And suddenly, the echo theory wasn't just a theory anymore. It was the only explanation that made sense. The first signal had come from somewhere ancient and distant. 3i had reflected it like a passive node waiting for a command. The second object, whatever it was, had heard the relay, and now it was coming to meet the relay station. A docking, a syncing, a joining. "What do we do?" Lane asked. Nobody answered. We couldn't do anything. We were watching two non-human objects, one large, one small, coordinate across space with a precision that belonged to machines older than our entire scientific framework. A small voice behind me whispered, "Is Earth in danger?" I didn't turn. I didn't breathe. Because the truth was worse than danger. Earth wasn't part of this event at all. We were spectators, eavesdroppers, accidental witnesses to a conversation that began long before humans learned how to walk upright. Evelyn pressed a palm to her forehead. "We need to prepare a statement." "Prepare it for who?" Mason asked. "For the agencies, for the public, for—" Her voice cracked. "We have to tell someone." "No," I said abruptly. She looked at me. "Excuse me?" I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry. "We can't tell anyone. Not yet." "Why?" demanded she. "Noah, I know it's bigger than our careers." "I know exactly how big it is," I said. "But look at the approach vector again." She did. Her expression changed, confusion first, then dread. Because the approaching object wasn't coming from interstellar space, it was coming from inside the solar system. "Where did it come from?" someone whispered. I ran the trajectory backward. The curve bent, arced, straightened, and pointed to a region of space nobody pays attention to. The Oort cloud, a place full of ice, and dark, and silence. Not empty, never empty. My chest tightened. "These objects," I whispered, "they're not visitors." Evelyn's eyes widened. "Noah? They've been here. Dormant." The lab felt like it dropped 10 degrees. The small object pulsed again, a sharp, bright spike on the spectrogram, an activation signal, a wake-up call. And 3i responded. The carrier wave stabilized, then tilted. Not broadcasting, receiving. Sync complete. A ripple of static swept across all our screens. Lights flickered, terminals rebooted themselves, the building's power grid groaned. And in that moment, that quiet, terrible moment, every hair on my body lifted as a realization crystallized. We had never received a message. We had intercepted a command. Not meant for us, not meant for our world, meant for something else already here. Something starting to wake up. The new object accelerated one last time, then vanished from our instruments, absorbed into the shadow of 3i and Atlas like a drop of ink into water. The carrier wave cut. Silence filled the room. Not cosmic silence, a different kind. A waiting kind. I turned slowly to Evelyn. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. "What do we do?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer, because whatever was happening out there, between those two objects, had nothing to do with Earth. We weren't the recipients, we weren't the targets, we weren't even the audience. We were simply too loud, too curious, too technologically advanced for our own safety. And now we'd heard something the universe never intended for us.
And in the cold quiet after the signal died, one thought kept clawing at me. If the message wasn't meant for us, then what happens now that we've intercepted it? And the more terrifying question beneath it, what else is waking up? You think you're prepared for the thing that comes after fear. You imagine there's a limit, a cliff you fall from, and below it, your mind levels out into numbness. But that's not how it works. Fear has layers. And once you pull back the first one, the one that tells you something is wrong, you find the deeper one beneath it. The part that whispers, you're already too late. We were too late. The moment the second object, the pursuer, the messenger, the whatever it was, slipped into the shadow of 3i ATLS, our instruments flatlined. Not from malfunction, from overload. It was like someone turned a dimmer switch on the whole solar system. No carrier wave, no pulses, no Doppler drift, nothing. Just the faint, ambient hiss of cosmic microwave background. A silence that wasn't natural. A silence that felt deliberate. It lasted 43 minutes. Not 42, not 44. Not a drifting approximation. Exactly 43 minutes. Then everything came back at once. The meltdown started at 3:27 a.m., though none of us thought to check clocks until it was already happening. I was standing at the far end of the lab, head in my hands, trying to understand what the disappearance meant. Around me, people whispered, argued, sweated. Nobody wanted to say what we all knew. Two objects, one interstellar, one dormant in our outer solar system, had established contact. And then they'd vanished from our reach, as if slipping behind a curtain. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the spectrograms erupted again. A burst, short, sharp, violent, detonated across every display. The room lurched. Someone yelped. Someone else dropped their coffee. A chair toppled over. "What the?" Mason shouted. I stumbled forward, eyes wide. The waveform on the screen was unlike anything we'd seen before. Not a chirp, not a pulse, a climbing structure, rising in frequency like a blade drawn across metal. "Filter it," Evelyn barked. We slapped filters on the signal, peeling back layers of noise until the underlying structure emerged. It was rhythmic. It was climbing. It was fast. And it was not coming from 3i. "Oh, God," Lane whispered. "There's another." "No," Mason said, shaking his head. "This one is too strong, too close." I leaned in. The waveform shimmered, unstable, flickering between harmonics like it was fighting against interference. "It's not close," I said quietly. "It's behind Jupiter." "But Jupiter can't—" "It's not Jupiter," I said. "It's something in Jupiter's shadow." A cold silence spread across the lab. The screen pulsed. A second signal appeared. Then a third. All rising. All synchronized. All coming from different angles, different distances, different depths. 3 sources, where before there was one. No one spoke, no one breathed. It felt like the air itself thickened, as if the atmosphere was trying to muffle the realization taking shape. There were others. Not just one dormant object in our outer solar system. Not just one interstellar messenger. More. Sleeping. Waiting. And now waking. "We need spatial triangulation," Evelyn said, voice cracking. "Now." Mason's fingers hammered the keyboard. Data flooded in. Triangulation maps unfolded across 3 monitors. The first signal was from Jupiter's shadow, low orbit, fast. The second came from the Jovian magnetotail, that long, invisible electrical filament stretching millions of miles. The third— "Oh no," Mason said. "No, no, no." "What?" I demanded. He pointed to the screen. The third source wasn't behind Jupiter. It was closer. Much closer. Earth-Moon L5, a Lagrange point, a gravitationally stable, almost perfect hiding place. "Are you telling me there was something in our own L5?" Lane whispered. But the question was rhetorical. We all saw the data. A dormant object in L5 had just woken up. The implications slammed into me like physical force. If these were machines, ancient, patient, unimaginably advanced, then they had been here far longer than humanity's entire written history. Silent, cold, inactive. Until 3i transmitted the echo. The echo wasn't a message. It was a key, a wake-up sequence, a synchronization code, a jolt across the solar system that said, "Now." The room devolved into chaos. People shouting into phones, scrambling for reference catalogs, pulling up orbital histories. Someone knocked over a stack of hard drives, papers scattered like snow. I forced myself to focus on the signals. They weren't steady. Not like 3i's carrier wave. They were stuttering, erratic, like devices booting for the first time in a long time. The room's lights flickered. One of the servers rebooted. A breaker tripped with a sharp crack. The interference wasn't local. It was environmental. Electromagnetic noise spiking across the band. Space was screaming. Then one of the signals stabilized, the one from L5. A sleek, perfect line formed in the center of the spectrogram. A line so deliberate, so impossibly clean, that you could feel the intelligence behind it. "What is that?" Lane asked. "It's not a message," I said. "It's a handshake request." Evelyn met my eyes. She understood. She hated that she understood. The object in L5 wasn't sending information. It was asking for synchronization. "What frequency?" I asked. 1430.05 megahertz, Mason said. "Above the hydrogen line, but close enough to resonate. A universal doorbell. The same band our own deep space probes use for telemetry." I swallowed hard. My throat burned. The L5 object was speaking in a language we would inevitably hear because it was the same frequency range our civilization used. "Can we isolate the modulation?" Evelyn asked. I worked the controls. Slowly, painfully, a modulation emerged beneath the carrier. Not a tone, not a pattern, something mechanical. A staggered rhythm. 3 long segments, 2 short. 1 long, 3 short. I felt dizzy. "That's a hardware boot sequence," Lane said, stunned. That looks like a status check." "It's not alien technobabble," Evelyn whispered. "It's a device testing its systems." I replayed the sequence, listened to the stuttering cadence. It wasn't language. It wasn't emotion. It was function. Purpose stripped to its skeleton. "What could wake these things up now?" Mason asked. The answer sat heavy in my mouth. The echo, I said. 3i wasn't transmitting to us. It was transmitting a command sequence. Evelyn clenched her jaw. A command for what? For these. The room spun around me. 3 dormant objects. One at Jupiter's shadow, one in the magnetotail, one in our own L5. Had listened, had woken, and now were synchronizing. For what? Before anyone could attempt an answer, alarms shrieked from the far side of the lab. Satellite feeds were dropping, telemetry streams were stuttering, an entire suite of orbital sensors went offline. Solar flare? Someone shouted. No, I said. The magnetosphere is stable. Then what's causing interference? The answer arrived before I could speak. A massive surge swept across the VLF bands, saturating them in seconds. Screens flickered, one cracked. The audio monitors spat harsh static. And then, the new signal hit. Not from 3i, not from Jupiter, not from L5, from far beyond the plane of the solar system. A deep, rolling tremor that rumbled across the spectrogram like a tectonic shift. "What the hell is that?" Lane shouted. "It's coming from above the ecliptic," Mason said. "No known objects up there," Evelyn muttered. Another burst, then another, each stronger, each closer. It wasn't random. It was a countdown. I felt lightheaded. The room was too bright, too hot.
3 dormant objects were converging toward 3i. A fourth was approaching from above the solar plane, and all their signals were synchronized. "What's the ETA for convergence?" I asked. Mason checked, his face drained of color. "Hours," he whispered. "Not days. Hours." "Jesus," Lane breathed. Evelyn forced herself steady. "We need to notify the agencies." "No," I said, louder than I meant to. She turned. "Excuse me?" "You don't understand," I said. "This isn't a threat. It's not an attack." "Then what is it?" she demanded. "A greeting party?" "No," I said. My voice cracked. "It's a maintenance job." The silence that followed was suffocating. "A maintenance job?" Lane repeated. I nodded. The realization hit me fully now, sharp as ice. These objects, they're not scouts. They're infrastructure, parts of a machine, components of a system that's been asleep. "And now it's waking," Evelyn said. "Because something sent the synchronization signal," I said. The echo wasn't a message at all. It was a key turning in a lock. Lane put her hand to her mouth. "A lock for what?" I stared at the star map, the convergence point, the shadows behind Jupiter, the silent shapes waking in the dark. "A lock," I whispered, "for whatever this system was built to protect or contain." The fourth object's signal grew louder, a metallic roar that rattled the lab windows. Lights flickered, a breaker blew. Half the screens died. The remaining monitors showed the fourth object diving toward the solar plane at impossible speed. And then the signal cut. Not faded, not drifted. Cut. Cold. Clean. Final. I felt my stomach drop. "What just happened?" Lane whispered. "It's entered some kind of shadow," Mason said. "Instrument blind spot." "No," I said. My voice felt hollow. "It didn't enter anything." They all looked at me. It activated something. The lab plunged into darkness. Not from power loss, from interference so strong it overloaded every sensor simultaneously. We stood there stunned, held in a silence deeper than fear. When the emergency lights flicked back on, the screens rebooted with only one thing visible. A single line of raw telemetry. One we didn't generate. one we weren't tuned to receive. Mason squinted. "What is that?" "A broadcast," I whispered. "From where?" "Not from inside the solar system." My chest tightened. The line repeated, slow, even, calm, like a heartbeat. "The system is awake, but not in words, in math, in structure, in intention." The lab felt too small again. Evelyn looked at me with eyes that understood the full implication. "Noah," she whispered, "what does that mean?" I swallowed. "It means everything we thought we were watching was just the warm-up." The monitors flickered again. A second line of telemetry appeared. Coordinates, a vector, a destination. Lane gasped. That's Earth's orbital path." I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "It's not pointing to Earth." They stared. "It's pointing to a point ahead of Earth, in our orbit, a place we haven't reached yet." "Why?" Mason whispered. The answer formed slowly in my mind, cold and inevitable. "It's a rendezvous point," I said. "A place where something plans to meet us." The room felt weightless. Evelyn's voice was barely audible. "What do we do?" I exhaled. "We find out what the system wants." Because the truth was simple and terrifying. Whatever had awakened was not coming for Earth. It was coming to Earth, and we had no idea which was worse. Emily didn't sleep the night before the signal changed. No one did, really. Not in Pasadena, not in Cambridge, not in Albuquerque, not in that cramped control room buried under Kirtland Air Force Base, where Colonel Harlow kept pacing the length of the carpet like he expected it to tear open and reveal an answer. The air had that tight electric quality of a thunderstorm that would never arrive, a kind of static pressure on the nerves. And maybe that was why none of them were surprised when, at 0314 Mountain Time, the sky spoke again. Except this time it wasn't the same voice. It came in as a spike on Sarah Milton's spectrum analyzer, a narrow, impossibly clean vertical slash of energy that didn't curve, didn't wobble, didn't breathe like natural emissions do. It looked like intention, like a finger pressed against glass. "Jesus," Sarah whispered. That's aimed." Marcus Reed was half asleep on the couch when his phone detonated with notifications. 3 missed calls from Emily, 2 from Noah, 8 from people he didn't know. He answered none of them. He just stared at the flood of spectrograms, each more unbelievable than the last. The signal wasn't broadcasting in all directions. It was pointing straight at Earth. By the time Marcus got to the MIT control room, Emily was already there. Hair tied in a hurried knot, jacket half-zipped, coffee untouched and cooling on the desk. Her face was pale but not with fear. Something colder. Something like awe. "It's not omnidirectional anymore," she said without turning. "It's a beam." Marcus nodded. "Meaning?" Emily finally faced him. "Meaning it wants us to hear it, or it wants something on this planet to hear it." Harlow entered without knocking, his presence filling the room like a shadow. He didn't sit. He rarely did. "Status," he said. Emily gestured to the running spectrogram. "The signal is narrowband, 500 hertz wide, absolutely unnatural, and it's pulsing in a new pattern." "Define pattern." "Structured," she said. "Not random, not atmospheric scatter, not solar interference. If I had to describe it," she hesitated, "it sounds like mechanical breathing." Sarah patched audio through the system. The room fell silent as the speakers clicked, hissed,
then released a sound that didn't belong to any physical process. Not a hum, not a tone, a pulse, a rising, falling compression that brought to mind a deep metallic cavity contracting and expanding, a living rhythm, a measured, deliberate cadence. Ravi arrived halfway through the playback. He didn't remove his backpack. He merely stood there listening until the pulse repeated for the 17th time. "That's synchronization," he said quietly. "It's locking onto us." Emily frowned. "Explain." "When a spacecraft tries to establish stable link with a receiver," Noah said, "it adjusts the signal timing to compensate for Doppler drift and motion. It tries to match phase." He pointed at the waveforms. "This is phase correction. It's aligning itself with Earth's frame." Marcus exhaled slowly. "So, it's communicating?" Noah shook his head. "No, not yet. It's preparing to communicate." The distinction hung in the air like dust illuminated by a knife of sunlight. Then the second pulse came, and everything changed. The room froze as the new wave crashed onto the screens. Higher amplitude, sharper attack, complex harmonic layering that hadn't appeared in any previous transmission. The spectrogram looked like the cross-section of a cathedral organ pipe. Vertical, ordered, sculpted. Sarah's hands trembled on the console. "Holy hell. That looks like encoding." Lucas Harrington catched in from Charleston, confirmed the impossible a minute later. The new pulse wasn't random. It contained two frequency layers, modulating one another. A carrier, and something riding on that carrier. "You're telling me it's carrying information?" Harlow said. Lucas hesitated. "I'm telling you the signal contains complexity consistent with information encoding. Whether it's meaningful or even interpretable is irrelevant." Harlow's voice sharpened. "If it's modulated, it's intentional." The room felt smaller suddenly, tighter. Emily zoomed into the modulation envelope. "It's not binary, not anything like human communication schemes."
She stepped closer to the screen. "But look, every seventh pulse has a subharmonic notch, the same depth, the same spacing." Marcus leaned in. 3-point symmetry, a repeating triad. Noah swallowed hard. "It's almost like punctuation." Sarah turned the audio back on. The new pulses sounded different now that they knew what they were listening for. Not random noise, not cosmic chaos. They sounded like something trying to speak through a body made of metal and vacuum. The room fell silent. Until Ravi Deshmukh connected from Deep Skynet headquarters in San Jose. His AI had been analyzing the signal in real time. "The triad isn't punctuation," Ravi said, voice crackling. "It's alignment, like calibration tones. They appear whenever a transmitter tests acoustic integrity." "Acoustic? It's radio." "I know, but the internal model interprets modulation patterns as if the signal source is monitoring its own resonance chamber, testing for echo stability." Marcus blinked. "Are you saying this thing has interior acoustics?" Ravi exhaled. "If the signal source is artificial, yes, completely plausible." The silence that followed was not the comfortable scientific kind. It was the kind that gathers in rooms before revolutions. Then, at 03:22, the signal changed again. Not louder, sharper. A sudden whip crack in the spectrogram as the beam tightened its bandwidth by nearly 40%. Earth wasn't just the general target anymore. The beam was focusing, narrowing, slicing down to some particular region. Emily's voice was almost a whisper. "It's not pointing at Earth." Marcus stared at her. "Then what the hell is it pointing at?" Emily's fingers flew across her keyboard, running geolocation inversions through 3 different algorithms. The answer froze everyone in place. "It's aiming," she said, "at the Deep Space Network facility in Goldstone." The room erupted, voices overlapping, chairs scraping, screens blinking with notifications. Ravi cursed. Noah nearly knocked over his laptop. Harlow barked orders into his tablet. The shock wasn't just scientific, it was personal. The object had selected a target, a human-built system, a dish, a receiver. Goldstone. Emily's chest tightened, pulse thudding against her ribs. That can't be coincidence. Harlow didn't blink. Of course it isn't. Marcus stepped forward. "What do we do?" Harlow's jaw flexed. "We listen, and we don't transmit a damn thing back." Emily didn't answer. Because she was watching the waveform thicken, another layer of modulation had begun. Lower, deeper, something like a second voice emerging behind the first. Noah leaned in. "That's new. That subbase component wasn't in any prior signal." Ravi's voice crackled through the speakers. "Processing it now. God, this is... Hold on." A beat of silence. Then Ravi inhaled sharply. "There's structure in the subbase line. It's..." He swallowed. "It's a repeating curve, like a topographical map." Emily turned pale. "A map of what?" Ravi didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice had lost all steadiness. "A map of its interior, the cavity geometry, as if it's revealing its own shape." Marcus stared. "Why would it do that?" "Because," Ravi whispered, "that's what spacecraft do before docking. They broadcast structural resonance profiles so the receiving station can calibrate capture fields." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Emily pressed her hand to her forehead. "It's not just talking to us, it's announcing itself, preparing interface." Harlow looked grimly serene. "Or preparing to land." The next 10 minutes spun into chaos. Not noisy chaos, coordinated, surgical, terrifying. Commands flew across secure channels. The military scrambled satellite assets. NASA engineers rerouted telemetry. Data setters shifted to high-priority mode. And through it all, 3I ATLS kept sending its steady, breathing signal. The resonance map grew more detailed with each pulse. Spherical cavities, concentric ribs, a central column that looked nothing like geology and everything like machinery. Emily felt her throat tighten. "It's hollow." Ravi corrected her. "Not hollow. Structured." Noah stared at the screen, hands limp at his sides. "It's alive." The moment he said it, the room stopped. No one moved. No one breathed. Because something about the signal, its rhythm, its timing, its steady mechanical churn, did feel alive. Not biological, not organic, but operational. As if something inside that icy object had awakened. At 0341, the modulation shifted one final time. The carrier flattened. The upper harmonics vanished. The breathing pulse steadied into a continuous tone. One long, unwavering line across the spectrogram. A line that grew brighter, stronger, denser. "Emily," Marcus whispered, "what's it doing?" She stared, frozen, as the beam narrowed further, now a hairline slash of energy aimed with surgical precision at Goldstone. "It's sending the first packet," she said. Sarah pushed audio to full output. The room trembled. Not physically, emotionally, because the sound that filled the speakers was unlike any they had heard before. It wasn't breathing, it wasn't machinery, it wasn't noise. It was a chord. 4 notes, rising together, held in perfect tension. No vibrato, no decay. A sustained harmonic structure that felt impossibly intentional. Emily felt heat behind her eyes. "That's musical." Marcus swallowed. "It's agreeing."
Noah shook his head slowly, eyes wide. No, it's not a greeting. Everyone turned. It's a lock code, a handshake protocol. Harlow stepped forward. Meaning? Noah's breath shivered. Meaning it's asking us to open a channel. The chord intensified, richer, deeper, more resonant, as if the object were waiting for a response, expecting one. Ravi spoke quietly for the speakers. The AI is detecting micro-modulations, tiny fluctuations, almost like waiting cues. Marcus looked at Emily. Emily looked at the screen, and the chord held. Waiting, inviting, demanding. Harlow broke the silence. No one sends anything back. Understood? But Emily didn't answer, because she finally realized what the harmonic pattern reminded her of. Not a greeting, not a lock code, a countdown. The first note dipped. The subharmonic trembled. Marcus whispered, "Emily, what's happening?" Her lips moved without sound at first. Then she said it. "It's not waiting for us." The chord thickened, rising in spectral density. "It's waiting," Emily said, voice hollow, "for something on this planet to answer it." The final harmonic snapped upward, and the signal cut to black. Silence. A silence so absolute, it felt physical. Then, from the speakers, a single new pulse emerged, smaller, sharper, and unmistakably different. Ravi gasped through the line. "That pulse," he said shakily, "it didn't come from 3I-ATLS." Emily felt her stomach drop. Harlow's head snapped toward the speakers. "Source?" Ravi's voice cracked. "Earth," he said. The room froze. The signal had been answered by something on this planet, something none of them had known existed, something that had just replied to an interstellar object as if it had been waiting for the call. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears as the realization struck her with the force of a collapsing star. 3I-ATLS hadn't come here to speak to humanity. It had come here to speak to something already here, and that something had just said, "Hello."